Yesterday was my 38th birthday. Massive thanks to everyone who did get in touch. Kat took me out to a restaurant where they bring stacks of meat to your table. Packaging of Hot Wheels model cars, but, you know, with Esther, ready to put more back together. I've actually been in touch with a guy called Jonathan Hughes, the guy behind RX8 Gearbox Adapters Uk. So let me talk you through all the things that me and Jonathan discussed about my setup. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and yesterday was my 38th birthday. Now I didn't make a big fuss online about it, although I did reshare my beautiful girlfriend Kat's story about my birthday. So massive thanks to everyone who did get in touch with your birthday wishes. I had an awesome day with Kat, a lot different than the kind of birthdays I've had in my past, and any of you guys that watch the Marcus Hayes on track videos will know what I mean there. But yeah, it was an awesome day. Kat took me out to a restaurant called Alvacero where they literally just bring stacks of meat to your table, and you have like a little card on your table, red and green, so you just put it on red when you want to have a rest sort of thing. But yeah, we both got absolutely stuffed. In fact, I woke up this morning and I felt like I was almost going to be sick because I was so full. And Kat has actually texted me and said that she probably won't be eating anything today because we ate so much yesterday. Now, Kat actually bought me a couple of really cool presents, one of which is this sort of Perspex replica of the packaging of Hot Wheels model cars, but you know, with Esther, my ST170 powered Mk1 Escort. I was actually thinking about getting some of those made myself. It's a guy on Instagram. I will put their link in the description for anyone who's interested. They're quite expensive for what they are, but I was actually thinking about making a sort of limited edition run of them, some of Esther and of Maud, to put on my website. So yeah, if any of you would be interested in grabbing one of those, you know, they will be very limited and they're not cheap, then, you know, let me know in the comments or drop me an email. Now, another thing that my beautiful girlfriend bought me was an ice bath. Now, if you've been watching the on-track videos, you'll know that nowadays I have a cold shower every day. It makes me feel awesome. It's almost euphoric. I'd recommend anyone try it out. You know, it wakes you up, it's really good for your mental health, and it's actually really good for your physical health as well, because it sort of makes your natural metabolism work harder. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. So it can actually help you lose weight. But anyway, the next sort of progression from cold showers eventually would be to have an ice bath, and she bought me this ice bath, which yeah, I think you sort of have it in your garden and yeah, jump in it. So I haven't tried it out yet, but yeah, another really cool gift. My girlfriend always buys me such cool gifts for my birthday, and her mum actually bought me some Adidas boxing shoes, or boxing boots, whatever you'd call them. Yeah, if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that I recently started boxing. So yeah, got some really cool presents, had an awesome day. But yeah, that's enough about my birthday. Now, I've actually been running around doing some errands today. I have dropped the welded diff center off to my diff man, so hopefully he'll give that back to me in a couple of days, mounted into the casing, and he'll obviously give me the broken LSD back, and eventually I can purchase a new main case for that. But yeah, once I do get that welded diff back, I'll be pretty much ready to put more back together, apart from a diff gasket. I did have a parcel through the post today from my friends at BURTON. I will leave a link to their website in the description, and I'm pretty sure I ordered a diff gasket. Maybe I forgot to add that to my cart, but that wasn't in the packaging. But yeah, other than a diff gasket, I'm ready to put more back together as soon as I get the welded diff back from my diff man. But I've also today been to see the precision engineer Carlo, and he's going to make me up the dowel that I mentioned when I took the engine out of Esther recently, and he's going to give the light flywheel a reface as well, so that's nice and flat. So yeah, loads going on at the moment. Now, I've actually been in touch with a guy called Jonathan Hughes. Massive shout to you if you're watching, mate. And Jonathan Hughes is the guy behind RX8 Gearbox Adapters Uk, which is the company that supplied the adapter plate that I've got on Esther's engine, which is obviously designed to make the RX8 6-speed gearbox bolt up to the ST170 engine. Now, he spent a lot of time, you know, with me, just trying to figure out if there is anything that's not ideal about my setup, you know, just trying to help me figure out why, you know, I'm killing clutches, etc, etc. And we have identified a couple of things that do need sorting on my setup to make it more perfect. So I want to send a massive thanks out to Jonathan for taking time to spend, you know, with me trying to figure out what's going on. And I will leave links in the description for anyone who's thinking about putting an RX8 gearbox in your car. He does adapter plates for various different engines. There's loads of really cool information on his Facebook page, and there's actually a thread on a forum which is really helpful. It's something that I was looking at years ago when I decided to go down that route. So yeah, get in touch with Jonathan if you're after an adapter plate for your car. But right now I'm gonna head over to the garage where I've got Esther and her engine, and I'll just show you the things that Jonathan's helped me identify that aren't quite right with my setup. But in the meantime, let me chuck up a couple of clips of Jonathan absolutely ragging his Mk1 Escort that he used to own that had an RX8 6-speed in it. Alright, so I made it to the garage and I've got Esther's ST170 engine out, and this is the spare RX8 6-speed that I removed from Esther last year. So let me talk you through all the things that me and Jonathan discussed about my setup. First of all, with regards to the plate itself. Now, I mentioned in the recent video that I noticed this crack. It's cracked there and there, right where this countersunk bolt is. And one thing that I didn't mention to you guys in that video, because I totally forgot, but I remembered while I was chatting to Jonathan, is that when I got this plate years ago, the countersunk bolts didn't quite sit flat with the plate. So what I did is I basically modified it and made the countersinks deeper. Now, this has inevitably meant that the countersinks are now closer to the edge of the plate, and that's probably why there's, you know, not enough strength here, and that's why it's cracked. Now, it's worth noting that I do have another plate coming, even though me and Jonathan both agreed that the fact I've got the dowels between the engine and the plate here and here, yeah, the plate is probably still in the right place even with that crack, but we both agreed that it'd be better for me to have a brand new one so we can be 100% sure that it's all in the correct place. But when I get the new plate, if the bolts I'm using don't sit flat, then I'm not going to go ahead and deepen out those countersinks. What I'll do instead is I'll modify the bolt, make it like not as wide maybe, or just bolt the plate up and then, you know, grind over the face of it. But yeah, I definitely won't be doing the modification I did with this plate, so that will stop that from cracking. Although Jonathan has said that what he might do in future is add a little bit of material here and the same over here and here, just to ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. But the plate that he's sending me obviously won't have those modifications because they've already been made before me and Jonathan had our discussion. Now, another thing that Jonathan asked is, did I shave down the dowels that are in between the engine and the plate here? Now, I don't remember having to do that, but in the video where I removed this engine, I could clearly see that they weren't protruding, you know, through the plate. So I either did do that or I don't need to do that. But yeah, I think I'll remove them nuts again just to check right now whether they do protrude at all. All right, so I can clearly see that these definitely don't protrude at all. But I think before I remove this plate, when I go to fit the new one, Jonathan was suggesting that I should just, you know, have the plate there and just lick over this with a grinder, just to make sure that that's definitely not protruding. But to my eyes, definitely isn't. And yeah, neither's the other one. So yeah, they're all good. Obviously, if they were protruding, then those dowels could be sort of leaning against the face of the gearbox and making the gearbox not sit dead flat against the plate. But yeah, they look good. Now obviously in the video where I removed this lump from Esther, we discovered that this spline is very badly worn, and basically it's just got loads of play when it's sitting on the input shaft of the gearbox. I have had another look at the input shaft on the gearbox that's fitted to Esther, and it seems absolutely fine. I basically tested with this spare clutch I've got that isn't broken, and you know, it wobbles about exactly the same amount on this gearbox as it does with the one that's fitted to Esther. So that means it seems like I've been really lucky in terms of not damaging the input shaft on the gearbox that is fitted to Esther. Now a couple of you guys said that this gearbox, when I sort of was seeing how noisy it is, definitely seems a bit more noisy than the one that's fitted to Esther. So I'm probably not going to switch the gearboxes. I'm probably better off, when I put her back together, leaving the one fitted that's already fitted. And to be honest, I'm thinking about using this clutch as well, just because I think it's better to, you know, when I finally do put her together, once I've, you know, rectified a couple of things, there is a couple more which I'll explain in a minute. Yeah, I think I'm better off just putting her together on the cheap, and then once I've definitely solved everything, then I can go out and buy another expensive clutch, etc, etc. And yeah, if things are still noisy and it seems like Esther's gearbox has got a noisy input shaft, then I can look at either fitting this gearbox or potentially buying another one. And yeah, the RX8 boxes are getting dearer and dearer now because everyone's using them in various rear-wheel drive applications. Anyway, back to this adapter plate. I mentioned in the previous video that this dowel down here, I actually ended up shaving so it's thinner on the back of it here, just so that it fits between the adapter plate and the sump. And actually, when it's all bolted up, that dowel is actually trapped between the sump and the adapter plate. You know, it is able to move now, but you know, when I'm bolting it all together, that doesn't move. And I don't actually need to get on the back of it with anything. I'm just able to drive the bolt in, you know, through the bell housing and into that, and this stays still. So the fact that that is trapped in between the plate and the sump when I'm doing everything up says that potentially that could actually be pushing the plate out this way ever so slightly. And it would only need to be, you know, ever so slightly, you know, fraction of a millimetre to make the plate not flat with the engine, and then that will mean that the gearbox isn't flat with the engine, and then that will mean potentially that the input shaft isn't, you know, running true. You know, it's got, you know, a bit of a wiggle on it when it's spinning, and that could cause the issue with the spline on the clutch. So what Jonathan suggested I do is maybe take a little bit of material off the sump just where this meets, and you know, it's right where the welds are, so there's definitely plenty of material to do that. It'll only need to be, you know, a fraction of a millimetre, but yeah, I'll worry about that when I get the new plate, and yeah, we'll just make sure that this thing isn't actually trapped between the plate and the sump. I may need to figure out a way of actually holding this still whilst I'm doing the bolts up, but yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I've got a feeling that this is going to have to be way too thin for me to get Carlo to make up one like I have with the other dowel, but yeah, we'll see. Maybe I'll have to put like a couple of flats on it or something, just so that I can, you know, get a spanner around the back here onto it. But yeah, that could be a reason why I'm having the issues, if that is pushing the plate out this way. I hope that all makes sense, because there's clearly loads of room now, so it's obviously not leaning against the sump, but when it's all bolted together, yeah, that dowel is really trapped in there and it doesn't move. As I say, I'm able to do the bolt up from the other side without even keeping that dowel still. Anyway, one other thing that could cause this issue, you know, could cause the input shaft and the gearbox to wobble about, and ultimately cause this issue, is to do with the spigot bearing in the crank here. Now I did actually have a go today at trying to remove that spigot bearing. That's another thing that I'm going to change while I'm here. It's another thing that I forgot to order from BURTON Power the other day. But yeah, the way that I remove these is I stuff a load of grease in the middle of it. I've got this multi-purpose grease here. You can also use bread, believe it or not. But yeah, I was trying with grease. And then what you need to do is you need to get a bolt that's exactly the right size of that hole. So it's like a tight fit in there, but it does slide in and out. I didn't have the correct size bolt, so I tried this bolt with duct tape on it. But yeah, it didn't work. And essentially, you stuff it full of grease, and then you put the bolt in there, and then hammer the bolt. You know, while it's in there, just hammer it, keep hammering it. And what that does is it pushes the grease in, and then the grease gets behind this bearing and starts to pull it out this way. So yeah, it really does have to be a tight fit. And I did actually manage to move it a little bit. And you can just see where it is there. It's well below this flat surface. Now what I think might be happening, or one of the issues that's definitely happening, is because, you know, you've got an adapter plate, so you know that's pushing the gearbox away from the engine essentially, and you know the input shaft here is in line with this bell housing, maybe even 1/2 mil or so in from the face of this bell housing. So you know you need this input shaft to sit in this bearing. Now if the gearbox is sitting against this plate, which is probably, I think this is 10 mil thick, 8 mil thick, away from here. So essentially, in an ideal world, you'd have this spigot bearing flush with this, or maybe even protruding ever so slightly. And that's going to mean that when the gearbox is bolted up, this input shaft is actually going to be in this bearing. And that bearing is there to support the input shaft, which again is going to make sure that it stays true and it's not going to wobble about. So I think that the fact that this spigot bearing is sunk in too far, and I stress again, it was deeper than it is now because I was able to move it out slightly earlier on. Yeah, I think the fact that that's too far in means it's not giving the input shaft the support that it needs. And that may have actually worn out the bearing inside the gearbox, which also supports the input shaft, supports the other end of the input shaft inside the gearbox. So even though a worn input shaft bearing might not have caused the issue with the clutch, it may now have a worn input shaft bearing because the spigot bearing wasn't able to do its job. But that's one of the things that I'm not going to know until I rectify the issues that I have discovered, then put the car back together and then see if it's still noisy. But there is one other thing that's definitely not right with my setup, which will definitely be causing more noise than there should be. And it involves the clutch arm. Now this sits in here, this pokes through the top there, and that sits in there, and the release bearing goes on here, and at this end you have the slave cylinder for the hydraulic clutch. Now I already knew that when it's all together you should have a little bit of play in this clutch arm, and I always have had a little bit of play in this clutch arm, but only when the slave cylinder isn't hooked up and bled. But one of the things that Jonathan made me aware of when I spoke to him the other day is that even when the slave cylinder is bolted onto the bell housing and it's all bled up, you still should be able to move the clutch arm ever so slightly. And what that means is that the release bearing then isn't leaning against the forks of the pressure plate for the clutch. So these forks here, that's obviously bolted onto your clutch plate goes in, and then this is bolted to the flywheel. So your release bearing basically pushes against this when you press the clutch. But when you don't have your foot on the clutch, you don't want the release bearing to be leaning on these fingers, which is why you need a little bit of play. If you don't have any play and that's all tight, that means that even when you're not pressing the clutch, these fingers are leaning against your release bearing, which is inevitably going to wear out your release bearing quicker, because your release bearing's always going to be spinning, and it's going to be under pressure, rather than it only being under pressure and spinning when you press the clutch, which is how it should be. So to create the clearance that you need, if I just take this back out and show you, you'll see that this basically leans on this nipple thing here. That literally goes into there, and these sort of clips clip onto it. Now you'll see that this nipple thing is actually screwed into this piece, which is all part of this piece. So essentially, you need to remove this piece from the gearbox. You've just got all these bolts around the edge here. Unscrew this nipple bit. You know, it's got like a hex on it there, you can see. And machine down this bit to basically make this in that way. You know, a few mil. And in fact, Craig, with the orange Mk1 Escort with an ST170 turbo lump in it, got in touch to suggest that I shave that ball down by about 5 mil, because that's what he had to do with his setup. So massive thanks to you for getting in touch. And massive thanks to everyone who's been in touch about this whole setup. So yeah, Craig has suggested that I basically shave 5 mil off of this nipple. Jonathan, when I was speaking to him, suggested that I basically remove this and screw in like an Allen key button head bolt, you know, with a nut on it, and then you're able to sort of, you know, trial and error, wind the bolt in and out, try different lengths until you get it right. And that'd obviously involve, you know, putting the engine and gearbox together out of the car on the floor and having the slave cylinder attached, and just, you know, keep winding that button head bolt in further and further back this way until you can get the engine and gearbox bolted together with the slave cylinder on, and so you've got a tiny bit of play in that arm. And then once you've done that, you can like measure how long that bolt is sticking out from here essentially, and then compare it to this one, and then you can just shave down this piece here and just make that shorter, and then you'll be able to screw this original one back in, and you would have created the clearance that you need. So it's lucky that I've got a spare gearbox here to be able to mess around with that out of the car. And then I can always just use this piece on the gearbox that's in Esther when it's time to put the engine back into Esther. And then it just means moving forward, whenever I change a gearbox, I need to just keep this bit because that's already modified to suit my setup. So as you can see, there's quite a few things that aren't quite right with my Mazda gearbox conversion, and hopefully once I've rectified all those issues, I won't have any more problems with Esther killing clutches. I know this video has been very talky, but I just wanted to get all of this information in one video, just in case there's anyone else out there that's considering an RX8 gearbox conversion, or anyone else out there like me that's already done the conversion and is having issues. I want to send another massive thanks out to Jonathan for taking the time to talk me through what might be going wrong with my conversion, and I will leave all the links in the description to RX8 Gearbox Adapters UK. Do get in touch with him if you're considering an RX8 gearbox conversion for your car. He's got plates for various different engine applications, not just Ford stuff, and he's bringing out new plates all the time as well. Another couple of things I'm thinking about doing whilst Esther's off the road, I'm probably going to remove her battery tray just while it's really easy now that the engine bay is empty, and I'm seriously considering cutting into a tunnel just to make it a bit bigger at the front and make gearbox removal easier in the future. But yeah, as I've already mentioned, there's quite a few things that I want to crack on with Esther while she's off the road, because when she's on the road, all I want to do is drive her. With a bit of luck, in the next few days I'll be able to get my Mk1 Escort back on the road, and I'm interested to see how she's going to feel with a welded diff. But yeah, plenty going on in my crazy Ford-based life at the moment. The cars are keeping me really busy, and I really appreciate all you guys watching my videos and following the journey. So that's all I've got for this video. If you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Do click subscribe if you're new to keep up to date with all my future uploads. Feel free to follow me on Facebook, TikTok and Instagram. Check out my website for merch and parts. Massive thanks to all my patrons for your ongoing support. I will leave all the links to all of that in the description, along with my email address for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.